Hello, so I finished another book at long last. It's been a while since I've had a book review. Took me a little bit of time to get through this one. The Early Chinese Empires, Qin and Han, by Mark Edward Lewis. This is a book about the first two, like, historical Chinese empires, the Qin Empire and the Han Empire. Really only covers about 400 years of history. 450 years of history. So not a lot of history covered, uh, but he does it very efficiently. So Mark Edward Lewis himself is a professor at Stanford University. Specifically, he's the Kuo Ting Li Professor in Chinese Culture. So apparently, Stanford University has four professorships named after uh, Li Kuo-ting, a Taiwanese economist. Not sure why Stanford has professorships named after that guy specifically, but whatever. Um, Mark Edward Lewis is specifically the chair for the professor of Chinese culture at Stanford University, and he's written quite a few papers and books on the subject. This one was the first part in a six-part, I believe, series. He wrote the first three. The other three were written by other people. So yeah, he wrote Qin and Han. He wrote China Between Empires, the Northern and Southern Dynasties, and he wrote China's Cosmopolitan Empire, the Tang Dynasty. The other three books in the series are The Age of Confucian Rule, The Song Transformation of China, that one's by Dieter Kuhn. The Troubled Empire, China in the Yuan and Ming Dynasties, that one was written by Timothy Brook. And China's Last Empire, The Great Qing, that one was written by William T. Rowe. So, yeah. Um, so I wanted to read this because I do really like history, particularly ancient history. And China, I didn't, was sort of a blank spot for me. Truth is, I haven't read much about most Asian, the histories of most Asian countries, and it's something I'd like to fix. I'd like to read more about Asian countries, about African countries, about the Americas before the coming of the Europeans. I just want to learn about as many different countries as I can. So this one was a really good start for that. So the book itself is very well written. He covers. Should mention this is not what is called political history, which is sort of biographies of great men. It's not that. He's not writing you know a list of names and dates and battles. He does go into a lot more than that. I mean, obviously, he talks a little bit about that as well, but that ends up being sort of like the most minor aspect, which I like. Because that sort of. It doesn't really. Like, that sort of history doesn't tell you about why you should care, sort of. Um, it's just a recitation of names and dates, and that generally doesn't really appeal to me. I prefer history that goes into details about the culture, which is what this is about. It talks about um, how it is, how Chinese society at that time was organized. So it goes into um, how households were organized. It explains the concepts behind the imperial power, the way that imperial power was sort of organized and the reasoning behind the way it was organized the way it was. Uh, Goes into philosophy and law and literature. Um, Architecture goes into how cities were laid out. There's a chapter on how cities are laid out, and again the reasons why they're laid out the way they are, and just keeps it going back to to cultural mores and the philosophy behind the culture. And it's not terribly long. It's only about 260 pages long, so it's not too terribly long. And it is very interesting stuff. Um, he also includes a pronunciation guide, which is useful, um, and which I just did not, which I still struggle with, frankly. Yeah, it's even reading the pronunciation guide. I kind of There's kind of stuff that like I still don't. I can't really remember it well. I can't really remember the pronunciations well when I'm reading it. It's a problem for me. That's a me problem. And so it's really well researched and laid out very well. Does talk about, I should say, there's plenty of like maps and plenty of images of art and things like that. Doesn't really go into much detail about Chinese about art of the time, but it does show occasional bits of art. Yeah, so split up on into chapters on the geography of empire, which is basically just you know talking about China's geography and how that geography affected the politics of the the country and of the people who live there, the people who live in different regions of the country, how geography is I should say how the geographies of different regions allegedly uh, shaped the people living in those regions. What people at the time said was the different personality types of the people in those regions. So, because of that, state organized for war, that is mostly focused, I think, on the Qin dynasty, which was very much built on conquering conquering the rest of the country. The Qin was sort of the first historically documented Chinese empire. It came at the end of the Warring States period, with the state of Qin finally conquering all the rest of the states. It lasted for about 20 years before it got overthrown by the Han Dynasty. So they didn't last very long. Um, Goes into why the Qin failed, what sort of why it couldn't sustain itself, why its own successes were also what laid the foundations of its defeat, of its fall. Um, so, because the Han Dynasty lasted so much longer, it does get a lot more focus than the Qin, obviously. Uh, there was just a lot more developed in that time. Uh, so it spends a lot of time on there. But it does also, it talks about why the Han was successful and why the reasons it was successful did, again, lay the foundations of its own eventual fall. Because that's sort of a big thing. Historically, a lot of empires, their successes laid the seeds of their failures just because of they were like they succeeded for a specific reason, which once they succeeded, kind of became irrelevant. Um, yeah, another nice thing about this book is it does make an effort to talk about common people. Obviously, history is primarily written by the powerful, or I should say, history is primarily written for the powerful. So regular people generally don't actually have much documentation, so there's not a lot to go by in regards to the lives of just the regular citizens. But Lewis does try. Yeah, he brings together what little documentation there is to give some indication of how they would have fit into the culture, how certain cultural expectations would have affected them as well. So he does make a genuine effort to include them, which is very, very much not how political history is written, because that is all about the powerful people. And yeah, it's a really interesting read. It's a really good primer on that early Chinese history, and it does obviously have a very long uh, bibliography that can be used if you're ever for anyone who wants to get more details on various various other aspects of it. If anyone, for anyone who's interested, though obviously a lot of the bibliography is going to be a lot more scholarly than this, which is intended to be accessible. It's meant to be something that an idiot like me is able to read and understand and use to learn. And yeah, I did learn quite a bit about it. So if you like history, then yeah, definitely give this one a try. I will probably at some point try to get the rest of the series, because it is all very interesting stuff. So I'll probably try to read the rest of the series just to get learn about more of Chinese history. But yeah, that's sufficient for this. Not totally sure what book I'll read next, but I'm probably going to start reading some of my digital books, my ebooks and stuff, because I got a lot of them. So I think I'll probably start trying to make some headway on those. But yeah, for now, early Chinese empires, Qin and Han.